Hi, everyone, and so excited to be with you again today. We have another one of our friends I want to introduce you to. His name is Erez Berkowitz. He's a guide who we've gotten a chance to travel with in Israel many times. Has such beautiful insight into the scripture. We've gotten a chance to travel all through the Galilee with him, which happens to be where he lives, if you can imagine. So wonderful. He's a farmer, lives in Kibbutz Almagor in the Galilee, and brings in a lychee crop each year. I'm sure maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just thought it'd be great to have him on and to have a conversation with him. And let's see where we go. Hey, Rez, great to see you, my friend.
Well, it's great to join you today from Galilee, Bill, and to see you out in California in your natural habitat.
Yeah,
Usually, I'm used to seeing you surrounded with more falafel, but I can see you at home, so it's wonderful, wonderful to join you.
thank you so much. Yes, we missed being there in the spring, of course. It was our hearts were there during that season, even though we couldn't travel. And it's always a highlight to come and see you when we come to tour the Galilee in the north. And, just appreciate so much how insightful you are, particularly in that area. And not surprisingly, since it's where you live, but thought maybe we could just navigate a discussion today where you share some insights and would love to hear you talk a little bit about life up there.
Yeah, well, I live on the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of a central stage for the ministry of Jesus. My fields that I farm lychee fruits, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
In fact, next week we are expecting our picking season to begin. So we have a few tens of thousands of kilos of lychees to pick in the next couple of weeks.
Mhm.
But yeah, my fields are spread out between the lands of Capernaum on the northern shoreline and down in the regions of the Beit Saida Valley, just where the Jordan
Amazing.
falls into the Sea of Galilee, and that's where we work the fields and enjoy our time. Usually, the earlier the hour in the day, the more we enjoy it when it's before it's too hot and crazy this time of year. But yes, we have a wonderful lands. We're blessed with so much fruits and friends and so much fruitfulness for covenant in being inside this land that we can enjoy today in a daily basis.
Well, it's an experience. I think I try to imagine as particularly as we travel through, just to get to enjoy the beautiful sights of that land and to see the fruitfulness of it, and to hold the scripture in one hand and your daily life and practical responsibilities in the other, and for it all to be in the same environment. That where you get to carry out just your duties and obligations as a husband, father, and as a citizen of Israel. It's just wonderful to come and observe it all and to see it all. And I love your insights in particular. You've done such a wonderful job on the tours that we've had the occasion to travel with you, really making the connection between the Jewishness of the early church and the stories told in the New Testament, helping us to understand the relationship between the traditions of the day and the things that we read in the passages. And, as I've traveled to Israel, I think I've been for about 13 years now, 12, 13 years coming to Israel. And it's one of the things that I probably just astonished me the most as I began to understand the cultural roots of the gospel and the New Testament, and began to derive such beautiful insights. The more I understood Jewish culture and the environment in which the gospel came to be and was born. So these are things that we've heard you teach on beautifully, and thought maybe we could cover some of those insights today. You and I were having a casual conversation earlier about the Sermon on the Mount in particular. You did such a beautiful job teaching at Beatitudes. I thought we could have a discussion around that event and things related to it.
Well, the Sermon of the Mount is going to be such a inauguration of the ministry of Jesus in amongst the fishermen villages 2,000 years ago that lined the Sea of Galilee. And I think that one of the interesting things to do as you read events of history or spiritual history is to try and stand as much as you can in the footsteps of the people who are going to receive those events at first hand.
Mm,
I mean, that's the beauty of a Holy Land tour, right? A
yes.
Holy Land is to take on one hand the scripture, and in the other, the land, the people, the culture, and to marry the two in order
Yeah.
to receive a holy score. So the folks that are going to be receiving the Sermon of the Mount, we talk about the context of people that seek healing, like people that seek feeding as well. It's all concentrated, whether it's the feeding of the 5,000, whether it's the sites of the hot springs, sulfur springs of Tabcha that are adjacent to the site that represents the Sermon of the Mount. After all, we don't have a site that says this is the site. We're
Mm-hmm.
rather a church that commemorates the sermon, right? The
Mm-hmm.
modern uh, from the 1930s, that
Yes.
is the Church of the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
But when we go there, one of the first things that people mention or kind of jump on me as we arrive, and they say to me, Erez, have you got your GPS coordinates in to hand? Have you got your map out? Are you feeling okay? Did you eat a good breakfast this morning? You know, when I take them to the Sermon on the Mount, I guess what they're expecting to find is a mount.
Mm-hmm.
And when you guys come with your friends and pilgrims alike, then one of the things that we don't see at the Sermon on the Mount is a mount, right? I mean, we go to Mount Hermon during the course of our tour up in the Golan. We go to Mount Carmel during the course of our tour, but the Sermon on the Mount is no mount. So I guess the question is that if I was one of the thousands of people that were congregating amongst the shores in seeking healing, feeding, some of the things that we'll meet during the time of the ministry of Jesus on those northern shores of the Sea of Galilee, then where's the mountain?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the minds of the people who received the Sermon on the Mount, where's the mount?
Mm-hmm.
In that context, you need to take yourself to the Old Testament. Uh, and the context of the Old Testament, that law doesn't come from a lake, even though in the Gospel of Luke, the Sermon on the Mount is actually delivered from a fisherman's boat
Mm-hmm.
on the shore. But law doesn't come from a town or a village, doesn't come from a valley or from a woodlands. Law comes from a mountain. And when Jesus says that I don't come to, uh, I'm paraphrasing. Jesus kind of says he doesn't come to delete Mount Sinai, but to complete Mount Sinai.
That's right. Yeah.
This is the context of what it means to be standing with the people who are receiving the new law, if you like, the new covenant,
Mm-hmm.
like Sinai too. So that is the kind of context that you can relate to when you come and you tour the land, but inside the context of what it means to be a Galilean in the first century,
Mm-hmm.
2000 years. And had you have received the Sermon on the Mount and taken on the messages and the teachings of Jesus from this sermon, then just think for just a moment that 3 years later, Jesus is on a cross.
Mm-hmm.
40 years later, all of the surrounding villages, Magdala, but Gamla up in the hills, and the lake itself is a lake of blood,
Mm-hmm.
destruction in the year 67 AD, some 40 years after the Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah.
is what it means to walk as having been a receiver of the sermon and taken on the teachings of Jesus. Turn the other cheek. Can you imagine the context of that? Just 3 years down the line of the Sea of Galilee
Mm-hmm.
being a sea of blood, Jerusalem is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. So, what does it mean to walk into the footsteps of somebody who receives the ministry firsthand with Jesus and the disciples and the multitudes that are going to receive feedings, teachings, healings, but then walk the passageway of faith with so much destruction and so much bloodshed all around them? So it's hard sometimes to put yourselves inside the shoes of the fishermen who become fishers of men when you put the context of to what is Galilee 2,000 years ago during the course of the first century.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And the times that followed, as you said, were very dramatic events in history, very dislocating events. And the destruction of the temple, which was in the absolutely the icon of Jewish worship and the focus of Jewish society, sacred a place as one could imagine. And for only a short time after the life of Christ, for it to be completely destroyed and decimated, and then for Jewish identity to receive that blow. Understanding the flow of history and how dramatic the course of events were subsequent to the teaching of that Sermon on the Mount is quite insightful, because we often imagine, sometimes here, particularly in the West, that coming to Christ is coming to a settled life, or coming to a life of peace, or coming to a life of tranquility. And, in some senses, in a deep spiritual sense, of course, that's true. When you come to the Lord, there are things that you receive from Him that are most certainly stabilizing forces in your life, recognizing your destiny, what He's won on the cross, the forgiveness of sin, and all of that. And they're deeply consoling to the heart that's searching for spiritual meaning and reality. But the life that transpired for those first century believers following His death and resurrection and ascension was quite dramatic. And up in the Galilee, I remember we had talked about during that time up there that there was a spark of rebellion up there that ended in bloodshed, that it really was sort of a kind of a chain reaction event that occurred up there in the north, and then ultimately culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. When you talked about the nature of that first century mindset up there in the Galilee, um, the disposition of the people there, and providing some insight into how they were ready to throw off the shackles of Rome. And then it was against that backdrop that the on the Mount was delivered into the minds of the people there. I just thought that was such a fascinating insight.
Yeah, and what does it mean to walk that passageway? Because that passageway is a passageway where you know death and destruction is a motif. And in the context of losing the temple, the destruction of the temple in Judaism,
Mhm.
to lose the temple is a punishment from God, right? It's a punishment from
Right.
the hatred of the brotherly hatred, according to the Jewish sages. We
Mhm.
lose second temple, the temple that Jesus would have been presented at and would have teaching at, and the temple that Jesus would have known, the second temple, continuation of the Herodian temple. We would have lost that temple because of brotherly hatred.
Mhm.
So if we are at the crescendo of brotherly hatred, then put the words of the Sermon on the Mount inside that chapter of history.
Mhm.
So this is the context of walking in history, and that's something that I've always considered, as especially as people we are guides that are teaching and guiding our way through the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, you have all of the history and all of the prophecy. So we
Mhm.
have both worlds, past, present, and future, to
Yes.
discuss journeys, as you are well aware. And
Mhm.
but to be able to transport yourself back and to be one of those people to have witnessed and to have taken on the message of Jesus 2,000 years ago is an incredible um, journey that is going to be shaken pretty much from the outset all the way along the way.
Mhm.
And the biggest shake for Judaism is the destruction of the temple, right? In other
Mhm.
words, Judaism of today is not the Judaism that Jesus would have known 2,000 years ago,
Mhm.
because time of Jesus is that of temple, and temple is the center of the spiritual world. And so much of Judaism is centered around the workings and the festivities of temple.
Mhm.
But in the end, in Christianity, Jesus takes on the temple, takes on
Yeah.
the motion of what it means to be at the center of a spiritual entity.
Mhm.
So so in the end, if you were to have been a first century believer and follower of Jesus, and you would have made your way through all the footsteps, including crucifixion, including destruction of Galilee and all of your communities,
Mhm.
including the destruction of Jerusalem and destruction of the temple, if you made it all the way through, then then the outcome of it is that people are still coming back today to Israel, specifically today, less so because of the conditions here, but as soon as it's possible, people come back in order to walk in those footsteps. And those are very difficult footsteps 2,000 years ago to walk, but people still want to walk those footsteps today.
Fascinating. You know, it's interesting. I think after the destruction of the temple, then it wasn't too long after that that the Jews were actually forbade from being in Jerusalem at all. And it was this attempt to dilute and displace and destroy first century Jewish identity to the point. And then as you have the message of the gospel affecting not only the Jewish world initially and profoundly, but then also you begin to see the demographics sort of shift and the Gentile believers start to increase. And so you have this sort of ebb and flow through history where initially in the early church was very distinctly Jewish, very focused on Jewish practices and traditions and there were, of course, at the house of Cornelius and Peter began to understand that there were some things that were going to be different, where Jesus said, "Don't call unclean what I have made clean," and then Paul and Peter had some conflict about surrounding the practicing of Jewish traditions now with Jesus having fulfilled the law. So there was some interesting things that they wrestled with within Judaism to try to understand differently and better, having had those things fulfilled by Christ, some of those obligations fulfilled by Christ. But you begin to see over the course of history how the Jewishness starts to become extricated out of early Christianity, the temple destroyed, the Jews eventually not even allowed to be expelled from Jerusalem and become the diaspora, the demographic shift where you have more and more Gentiles coming to faith. And so throughout the course of human history, it's very interesting to trace that and to see eventually how Christianity is adopted by the Roman Empire, and it goes through and takes on all the encumbrances of the Empire of Rome and begins to be shaped by those influences there, all the while maintaining fidelity to the message of the gospel, Christ crucified, forgiveness of sin, the Son of God, many of the things that we still embrace and hold as orthodoxy today. But what a history it's been. And what a remarkable turn of events. And I think it's hard. I've often find that I struggle greatly to try to explain not just the novelty, but the sheer miraculous nature of the rebirth of the nation in 1948, and the fact that it's only happened such a short time ago, and the shock waves that would have been felt by earlier generations, who, if they would have witnessed it, would have had to go back to the scripture and re-examine everything that they understood and try to formulate an understanding of in the absence of a nation. But in 1948, we then have a nation again. So when we revisit passages like Romans chapter 11, where Paul speaks very passionately about a future fulfillment for the nation, all the prophetic promises, those promises are now personified in the fact that, in a sense, in the fact that the nation is now reborn. It's an entity that exists. You are a citizen of that country. You live there. You are literally plowing the fields in the Galilee and bringing in a harvest and living life there. I mean, it's just really truly astonishing to take a step back and to see the nation through that prophetic lens. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, I mean, that's true, exactly. So that's what I said when I said that we have to not only guide history, we have to guide prophecy, but also in our everyday life. And indeed, the return of Judaism, Israel, back to the land of Israel that had such a unique context. So much of Jewish law is based on what you can do in Israel and outside of Israel. So if you're 2,000 years outside of Israel, then keeping just keeping the Jewish law through scribes, through traditions, through teachings of what it means when one day you will be in the land of Israel, then even that itself is an incredible feat of history that those things remained intact only to return
Yeah.
thousands of years later. You alluded to the fact that the church in the days of in the teachings of Paul starts to take away some of the kind of inner Jewish texture of the first communities or the communities that Jesus would have been part of and knew here
Mm,
in Galilee. But Judaisms didn't release the link to Judea and Israel, even though the Roman Empire changed the name to Palestina. And
mm,
of course, there's going to be colonial powers, one after another, that will take over this land and rule this land from more kind of foreign influences, right? I mean, we have 1,000 years between the
yeah.
Crusaders that are sitting in Jerusalem to the British Empire that put a high commissioner in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. No government sat in Jerusalem, right? I mean, there was, it's always part of empires, larger empires that stretch across this region. But even though it's kind of a chain of history that we talk about, from the Crusaders through to the Mamluks and with and the Ayubi dynasty, of course, and the Mamluks and the Ottomans and 400 years of Ottomans and British. And we read the history books and we go from chapter to chapter, and it looks very kind of neat, right? When it's got like, I'm now reading about the 400-year Ottoman Empire. Next chapter, the British Empire. Okay, now I will read about the 30, 40 years of the British, 30 years or so of British Empire rule inside the British Palestine its colony.
Mhm.
Next, you turn the next page, and it says the state of Israel. And you go back and you read in the Old Testament, and then what it means that one day the nation will return and destroyed cities will be rebuilt and fruit trees will be planted like I plant my trees and new springs and new streams will flow in the deserts, right? Like, how do you read Isaiah in the same eyes when
Yeah.
you travel around this land and you see all of these things taking
Mm,
place? But I don't remember if I ever told you this story, Bill.
mm,
State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May, 1948. That's the calendar, the international calendar. 2 days earlier, on the 12th of May, 1948, there was a meeting which started around noontime and ended around midnight in Tel Aviv of what is 10 members, that's 10 out of 13. Simply two were stuck in Jerusalem and couldn't get out of Jerusalem because of the siege, and one
mm,
was in the United States. So we've gone down to 10 members of what is essentially a kind of executive committee, a government before government, because we are 2 days before the British Empire's departure from the pages of history in the Holy Land. And the meeting is going to discuss what the Americans are proposing and having sent back through Moshe Sharet, who would one day be a prime minister of Israel. And the message from the Americans, this is the message from George Marshall, right? From the he's Secretary of State by the time we're in 1948. Of
mm,
course, he was the chief of staff in the Second World War. And General Marshall is going to send back a proposal that says basically the Americans do not support the declaration of the State of Israel.
mm,
And what the Americans propose is that the Jews, because the Arabs have already uh, rejected the proposal,
mm,
so the Jews will take on a 3-month truce. We're talking about the middle of already the Civil War and conflict of the War of Independence that is going to lead to a new entity that the United Nations will take on. That's the American idea.
mhm,
Just don't do anything, sit still, wait to see what happens.
mhm,
And now 10 members of the executive committee of what the government of the Jews of Israel are going to vote whether to take on the American plan or not, which is essentially a vote on, do we declare independence in 2 days' time when the British mandate leaves the land of Israel?
mm,
And do you know what the outcome of that vote was?
mm,
6-4.
mm,
One vote made the difference between taking on the context of declaring independence in 2 days' time and therefore fulfilling ancient prophecies, returning a Jewish
Fascinating.
empire back to the land of Israel, and everything that has come since, including me planting my trees and growing my lychees on the Sea of Galilee, is all based on one vote on the 12th of May, 1948.
That's remarkable. Those
So
little events in history that are often
when you
lost or
stand in
not
the
known or understood.
when you stand in the shoes of the moment,
Yeah.
well, how do you comprehend that moment? How do you act in such a moment? Today there's so much mayhem in the world that there is a new page of history is being written, right?
Mhm.
Something's happening in the Middle East, something's happening in the world, a new page is being written. Who's going to be worthy of the pages of history to write their own chapter?
Mhm.
And there's not really any other examples that I can think of or I can speak to of an ancient peoples in the depths of the ancient relics of the Middle and Near East that left behind ancient texts, coins, um, um, remnants that are going to 2,000 years after they've been literally wiped off the map,
Mhm.
put on a flag, and write a new chapter of history.
Mhm.
I don't know of another story like that, but it is a story that echoes the prophecies that we find of ancient Israel.
Oh, and it's so fantastic. I mean, it really is exhilarating to see to make the connection between the two. Think of that as you described the nuance of history and that a 6-4 vote set the course for what would ultimately become one of the most impactful fulfillments of prophetic biblical history, certainly within the scope or as close to our lifetime, maybe as we'll see. Who knows that there's more ahead of us. But it's really, and I love this insight from you. We had talked about it earlier to actually enter into the idea of the tension of that moment. Could you imagine being in the room with those 10 men, and thinking about the weight of that moment? And we look back on it with hindsight now and see so much that has been born out of it. It reminded me earlier as we were talking of the disciples who were on the boat with Jesus in the boat on the sea during the storm and entering into the context of that moment where they had seen him do so much up to that point. They had received his words and walked with him and were able to gather a very um, intimate sense of who he was and what his mission was and why he was there. And yet, in the experience of being on that boat in the midst of the storm, they feared for their lives. And as that storm raged around them, and famously, as the scripture tells us, they woke him up and say, "Why are you sleeping? You're going to leave us out here to drown." And
Yeah.
and he gets up and he calms the storm, the winds, and the waves with just his words, and they marvel. And I think that we get to see how the chaos and the mayhem, so to speak, that you had made reference to earlier, really serves a purpose to stir that marvel in us when he speaks over it and brings it to a calmness and to a stillness. And for us as believers, it really is a consolation because we try to make sense of the world that we're living in, particularly, for me personally, the troubling rise in the anti-Semitism or this malicious preoccupation with the Jewish nation, just roughly 7 million people living in the land there, about 14 to 16 million worldwide, and a rounding error on the world population of 9 billion people. And yet there's such an intense malicious preoccupation with this people. And when you look at it through a spiritual lens, you really begin to understand that there's a reason why. Because the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, made the choice and a very deliberate decision to use that people as the object and the avenue through which he would reveal himself in human history, and has done it in so many incredible and remarkable ways. Reading through the Old Testament and recognizing his faithfulness to the covenants and promises he made, even when the nation was unfaithful to them. That the power and the strength of that covenant making God rested on his character and his power. And And then, as we observe that and think about that in modern times that we live in with so much uncertainty and technology moving so quickly, it really gives a great sense of consolation to understand that the same God who kept those promises then is the one who in the New Testament, through the Apostle Paul, promises to us that he'll finish the good work that he's begun in our lives. And so context, as we've been talking about over the course of the conversation, being able to marry the land and our knowledge and understanding of the word, being able to stand on the sites to consider the ancient history all the way through to the very profound details of the modern history of the nation, and to take that all to heart, to try to enter into those moments those of understanding where we can put ourselves in the moment without the benefit of hindsight, to
Yeah.
look back on and project our confidence onto, but to stand in those moments and recognize the gravity of them. What a story. What a beautiful story. Hard not to fall in love with the nation of Israel when you recognize the very beautiful story that they have in the arc of history. And I agree with you. There isn't a nation on earth that I can think of that has even remotely close to the same story of reconstituting themselves again after having been dispersed for thousands of years. You talked about the one period of time in history that stretched for 1,000 years, and yet we could read that and summarize it in just a sentence in our reading of the course of history in Israel. But then on the other side of that, to somehow or another navigate back to the point where on the other side of a 6-4 vote, the powers that be there in the country decide, no, we want to declare our independence and we're going to start a nation again. So all of that is so intensely remarkable. But then to come there today and to see what's been accomplished in such a short period of time. I mean, the skyline of Tel Aviv is just stunning and beautiful. And to think that it's been built in such a short period of time. There are so many innovations that have affected societies around the globe that have been born out of the Jewish mind, and too many to number. But Israel is said to punch well above their weight class based on their population size compared to the rest of the earth, or the contributions that they've made to the betterment of humanity. And it's just wonderful to see the story continuing on.
Yeah. Well, you can join me on my Facebook,
Yeah.
and you'll see the story in my own humble way. I didn't build Tel Aviv, and I didn't build any skyscrapers. But the other day, after the Iranian missiles and everything else,
Hmm.
my son said to me, "Dad, I want to go fishing. I'm a terrible fisherman. I don't know really how to. I'm not a fisherman."
Hmm.
And so I said, "Okay, we'll go fishing." And we met up with a friend of his. We went down to the. You can see photographs on the Facebook.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
while my kids were fishing, they were throwing their rods, and I was on the beach, and I looked up, and I could just see them throwing their rods, and behind them was the cliff face of the Mount of Beatitudes of the church. You see
Hmm.
the church of the Mount of Beatitudes just perched behind them. And here are my boys fishing. And how many times have we discussed, these are the shores of the fishermen who become fishers of men. And
Yeah.
suddenly I thought, here are my kids sending their rods, their lines, fishing, what shoes they have to fill while coming to fish on these shorelines. And then I
Wow.
realized they were barefoot.
Yeah, I saw those
And then
pictures. They're beautiful. Yeah.
we
Yeah,
all
they
build
were.
our we all build our own we all build our own skyscrapers, and bringing up children on the shorelines of Galilee is uh, is a special experience to watch them
Mm,
grow up inside the world that we're all around. So yeah, I will pick
indeed.
my lychees, and then after my lychee pick, there is an archaeological dig that I will join here in Beit Saida, what is turning out to be Beit Saida, and. And in the meantime, the kids will carry on fishing, and the communities will grow, and the people will plant their own trees and their seeds along the way,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
slowly a story is being rewritten.
It's continuing along. Beautiful. Well, we can't wait to get back. Hopefully this fall. I think we're planning on being there this fall. We have a group coming in the fall, and then of course we'll be planning for 2027 extensively. Just believing the door will certainly reopen again, and we'll get to come and experience that beautiful land again. But can't wait to travel that area with you again, Erez. And looking forward to being brought again, into touch with the contours, the beautiful contours, being in the moment, the stories of the New Testament, the stories so central to the gospel, the stories so central to the life of Jesus, and being able to stand in the Lamb while doing it and having our imagination stirred, to the beauty of these things. Looking forward to being there with you again, and we'll look forward to do it very soon. And yeah, for anybody who's watching this video, Erez is on my friends list here on Facebook, so please find him and send him a friend request. And the pictures of him standing on the shores of Galilee fishing with his kids are wonderful. So some videos that you placed there walking through the thicket and the tall grass there along the shoreline. It's just wonderful. So thank you for taking the time to share these insights with us. We'll have to do it again. We'll pick a topic and to discuss it. But man, I sure do
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing your perspective and helping people to see the real Israel.
Anytime and all times, and we look forward to your return as soon as possible with friends, with all of the communities and people. And we are the bridge, right, between Galilee and California. So let's bring as many people as possible. With pleasure.
Amen. Yeah, let's do it. Thank you, my friend. God bless. And
So
thank you,
much.
everybody, for joining us in this conversation. And we'll look forward to bringing more to you in due course. In the meantime, God bless. Continue to pray for the nation of Israel, pray for peace, and pray for the open doors so we can once again go and explore the land, open the word, and have the Lord stir our hearts and imaginations for all the beautiful things He's done. Thanks.